Hey guys, welcome back to another edition of the Cool Sports Network. I am your host, Chase Coburn, and today I am joined by a very special guest, the head coach for the Sacred Heart Pioneers men's basketball team, Coach Anthony Latina. Coach, thanks so much for joining me and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm glad we are finally able to connect. I know I met you when Sacred Heart just had a great dominant win over Fairfield University, and obviously, we talked about it before, two tough losses back to back. But you really have a great team in place, and we're excited for what they can do in the second or kind of this final stretch of the season. We're going to talk about your team and what they're capable of, but I want to kind of go back to even your childhood, if this was the case. When was kind of the moment you realized you wanted to go down this path and become a basketball coach? And what has been your career path since to get to the point where you're at now as a head coach of a successful Division I men's basketball program?
That's a great question. So obviously, I played basketball, and I grew up in the South end of Hartford, which was a great place to grow up. I first fell in love with basketball at St. Augustine's High School in Hartford, and they had a real basketball was really a thing there. And when I was in fifth grade, it was the first organized team. I saw them win the New England championships. I was on the fifth and sixth grade team, and that same year, South Catholic High School, where I played in Hartford, years later, went to the state championship game, lost to Warren Harding, who was a powerhouse out of Bridgeport at the time. And I just remember after fifth grade, and I was playing a little bit in the parks and stuff at South End Park in Hartford. But after that fifth grade year, I just fell in love with basketball between St. Augustine's, winning the New England, South Catholic, getting to the state championship game. And I was fortunate enough to play for St. Augustine's and win a state championship at South Catholic for Coach Joe Riley, who is a legendary coach his son and I, who's the head coach at East Catholic High School now, were captains along with another good friend of ours, Eddie Keneally, on that team that won a state championship in 91. And I was fortunate to play in college at Brandeis University, which was a great school, and had a great career. And I actually was going to teach and coach. Interesting story. So my senior year at Brandeis, I majored in history, American studies, minored in English, in education, and I was going to be a social studies teacher. And because basketball is a 2-semester sport, I couldn't do my student teaching. So I was going to come back for another year and do my student teaching in September after I graduated, and then be a teacher and a coach. And it was cool. And obviously, I really looked up to Coach Riley, who was a teacher and a coach. And I thought it was a pretty cool idea. And I went to one of my roommates there used to be a Division I versus Division II All-Star game after the season at Holy Cross. But before that game, there was a Division III All-Star game, and he played in the Division III game. So my roommates and I all played, went to go see him. And then when I was leaving the game, an assistant coach for UMass Lowell was walking into Holy Cross to see the Division I versus Division II game.
Yeah.
And it was a Thursday night or something. And he's like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I knew him because he was a player too, and I had played against him and things of that nature. I said, "Yeah, I think I'm going to be teaching." He goes, "Hey, we're looking for a GA." He goes, "I think you'd be great." And I'm like, "Really? Like a graduate assistant?" And I never thought of college basketball as I'm a coach. And
Right.
and so he said, "Hey, why don't you come up?" I went up like 2 days later just to meet the coach who I'd never met, who Gary Manchel, who to this day, matter of fact, I went with dinner with him last week. He's the head coach at Mercyhurst now, and they played Central Connecticut. And I met with him, and he said, "Hey, we'd love to have you." And I said, "Well, I got to get my master's anyway." And so just dumb luck, if I had not gone to that game, I probably would have never gotten into college coaching. I probably would have just did my student teaching, and I'd probably be
Wow.
teaching at East Catholic High School and coaching there
Yeah.
with Coach Riley there, Luke Riley, or I don't know. It was a little, kind of fortuitous, and so um, I ended up taking the job there. It wasn't really much of a job, but it was an opportunity and to get my master's at UMass Lowell. And I remember my first 6 weeks there, I'm like, this is tremendous. I can maybe do this for a living. Mind you, I was a full-time student and a GA. So it was,
All right.
I remember saying to myself, man, if I could just coach, my God, this would be incredible. So after my first year as a GA, the assistant who I knew left, I became full-time in year 2. And I finished up my master's that year as well, which was a pretty busy year. And the rest is history. I stayed, 3 more years, so 4 years total at Lowell. I was fortunate to get the job at Central Connecticut as an assistant with Howie Dickerman, who was outstanding coach, and Steve Peichel, who's the head coach at Rutgers, was an assistant there, and Pat Sellers, the current head coach at Central Connecticut, got hired the same year I did. And it was, at the time, there was only 3 assistants. It was Coach Peichel at Rutgers, Coach Sellers, who's the head coach at Central Connecticut, and myself, our first year in '99. So a lot of it was luck. I loved basketball. I knew I fell in love with basketball. I knew I wanted to be a high
Right.
school and teacher because that's all I kind of knew. That's all the exposure I really had. And then that one day I kind of stumbled upon it, the opportunity, and I met with him, and it kind of worked out, and the rest is history. So this is year 30. I was four years at Lowell, 4 terrific years at Lowell. What a great place. 6 awesome years at Central Connecticut, 2 NCAA tournament bids. I think we played in the championship game 3 or 4 years. And then this is my 20th year here. So I left Central to be here and assistant for Dave Bike, which was a great opportunity for me and my family. And I took over for Coach Bike when he retired. So it's been a fun ride. A lot of luck was involved. A lot of, kind of taking advantage of opportunities. And that was it. So I didn't have this big dream. Hey, I'm going to be a college coach as a young kid. It was always like most of the people I looked up to were teachers and coaches, whether it was my coaches
Right.
at Justin's or my rec coach, who's still a mentor to me, or Coach Riley, who has since passed away. I mean, they were all teachers and coaches. And I'm like, these guys are awesome people. I look up to them. If I could ever be anything like them, that would be super cool. And so that was my whole focus. It was like, hey, teach and coach, great lifestyle, great life.
Right.
And, I came from kind of like a blue collar background. So like money was never something I thought about. Like as long as I had enough money, have a place and feed my family and all that kind of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't even in my thought process. I mean, we were, like I said, we were a blue collar family, and I always thought we had plenty of money, even though we didn't. In retrospect, we probably didn't have a whole lot, but we had a lot of love in my family. So I was very blessed in that regard. So it was something that I kind of stumbled on senior year in college, in the spring of senior year after the season, and after that point, I was like, wow, I think I can do this. And again, I caught a lot of breaks on the way, with not only getting the job at UMass Lowell, but then also catching that break at Central Connecticut, and us having me being part of a program that was already on its way to being built. And then to get the opportunity at Sacred Heart and to help build this at Division I level. And so that's where we're at. And then I was lucky to be at a place here like Sacred Heart that really is a special place. Like, most coaches don't stay at one place for 20 years. And for whatever reason, either they're not welcome for 20 years or they don't want to stay. And I've been very, very fortunate to be at a place that I love, that values what we do, even though it always hasn't been, we at the highest level, but they value how we go about it. And I'm so blessed. I know sometimes, you do podcasts or people ask about it. And I mean, I think the proof is in the fact that, hey, I never left because I never wanted to leave. My family is from Connecticut. My wife is from Connecticut. My parents, who passed away this past year, were both from Connecticut. No, thank you. I got to spend a lot of time with them, which my children, I have 2 children that are older. They spend a lot of time with my grandparents, with my parents, their grandparents. So it's been really a good marriage between myself and Sacred Heart. And because of that, I feel a great responsibility to this university to try to put a product on the court that they can be proud of. Now, we haven't gone to the NCAA tournament, which is a great, great, great motivating factor for me, and a disappointing thing for me at this point in my career, because this place has been so good to me that, they deserve a winner. I think we put a product on the court that they're proud of. We have good kids that play hard, that play the right way. But I do think that's the missing element. We've had some success, but we've missed that. And that really motivates me as much now as it did when I started coaching. So I hope that we can do that sooner than later, but very blessed. So that's the short, long version of how I ended up a college coach.
Yeah, and obviously you've had some success. Again, you mentioned no NCAA tournament appearances, but you've just been so successful at Sacred Heart. And you mentioned how you took over for Dave Bike. I mean, a Sacred Heart legend. I mean, he was a key reason why they were able to make that seamless transition into Division 1. They were Division 2 champions under him. Quickly before we kind of get into this team and what they're capable of, just talk to me about what you learned from Coach Pike and how he kind of helped you get into this role and now have some success on your own as the head coach of Sacred Heart.
Yeah, anytime you have someone that has been, has any success, there's always a reason for it. Obviously, they do certain things and their work ethic, whatever their ability, but also I think a big part of that is having people that you can look up to that have mentored you to get to a point to be successful when you get your own opportunity. And I've been so lucky, and I've worked for 3 head coaches. Gary Manchell at UMass Lowell, who's now the head coach at Mercyhurst, Howie Dickerman at Central Connecticut, and then, of course, Dave Bike here. And, I worked for 3 awesome, awesome coaches and just tremendous, high character, elite human beings and people. My first job was with Gary Manchell, who's a brilliant basketball mind. He was just so honest with me about not only my performance, but hey, what the next step is for me. And it's not like that everywhere. When I had the opportunity to interview at Central Connecticut, he's like, you got to take that job. He tried to help me get it, all
Right.
those kind of things. So my first boss was just, besides being an incredible coach, he was just an incredible person who really guided me in my best interest. He liked me as an assistant, but he knew I couldn't make a career being an assistant at UMass Lowell. At the time, they were Division 2. And then I worked for Howie Dickerman, who was a chief architect with Jim Calhoun in building the University of Connecticut into what it is today. He was with Coach Calhoun every step of the way, recruiting the likes of Ray Allen and Daron Schefter and Travis Knight, and great player after great player. The list goes on, how many pros they've had. So to work for someone like Coach Dickerman, who is a legend in his own right, and I learned the Division 1 level from him, and the level of effort and work ethic it's going to take to be successful at Division 1 level. He was just an incredible worker, and I was surrounded by. Steve Peichel was the top assistant at the time, and look what he's doing at Rutgers, and Pat Sellers was there, and we were working together. I learned so much from Pat. He's one of the just most high energy, high character people, and then I actually worked when Steve Peichel left to go to George Washington to be an assistant. Coach Dickerman hires Chris Casey, and look what he's doing. So we worked together, and so I learned so much from Chris. So I'm working with these tremendous coaches and people, and then I come to Sacred Heart, and Coach was just a powerhouse Division 2 program. They made the transition to Division 1, which was very difficult at the time, much more difficult then, more so than it is now. And he showed me a different way to do it. And I'm so grateful for him because, when I remember, I think the reporter, the Connecticut Post, called me, to do an interview when I took the job leaving Central to come here. And I think his name was Chris Cassavan. I think that was the name. And I said, my quote on Coach Bike was, he's as good a person as there is in coaching. And he was a reporter for the Connecticut Post, and he had been covering them. And he said this, he goes, let me correct you, Anthony. He goes, he's as good as a person as there is. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Coach Bike is, besides being a legendary coach, he just gave me such a different perspective that I really needed at the time. I was a young, fairly newly married. We had our son, who's now a junior at Assumption, was a toddler, was a newborn, and my wife was pregnant with our daughter, who's now a sophomore here. And he just gave me a different perspective on how to look at this and how to have a situation where you can be a successful coach and still do a good job as a husband and a father, which is the most important job I ever had by a mile. And believe me, I've fallen short a lot, but I think with his guidance and his perspective, it really, I think, helped me probably do a better job than I would have, not only as a coach in having a little more balance, but also in making sure that I'm doing what a father and a husband should do. And again, far from perfect, but I'm so grateful for him, to him, for not only this opportunity, but just showing me a way. Because I mean, this was a wonderful man, a family man who had a great family. I mean, him and his Judy Bike is one of the, they're a wonderful couple, and he's got wonderful children. And just seeing how he interacted with them and how he made this work for 35 years. I said, boy, I want to do this for a long time, but it's hard. This is a burnout job if you don't have the right perspective.
Right, of course.
And even if you do, it's still super hard.
Of course.
And so I'm so grateful to him for showing me another way. And so I kind of took a little from all three guys. I'm so grateful for all of them are still very close to me. And all of them, I know that I can pick up the phone at any time, and they would do anything to help me, and I would do anything to help them. So, that's, as I got older, the two things I learned is, boy, it's about relationships. It really is. If you want to have a great life, you have great relationships, and I've been so fortunate. And the other thing I learned is all three of those coaches were very successful, but they were all very different. And the one thing that I think the common denominator with all three coaches were, they were very true to who they were. They didn't try to be someone they weren't. And I really kind of, and because they were all different in their own way, and everyone's different, but really uniquely different, I kind of try to take a little from everyone and incorporate to who I am in my style and what is most important to me. And that was an important lesson is the best coaches are true to themselves, but authentically themselves. Jim Calhoun was Jim Calhoun because he didn't try to be someone he wasn't. Howie Dickman tried to be Howie Dickman. Coach D was his, Coach Bike was himself. And so that's what I tried. Because if I tried to be Dave Bike or Howie Dickman, I would have failed miserably because those guys were so unique and such a force of nature in their own way that I needed to find my own path and my own way. And it's hard. Listen, going from being an assistant to a head coach was one of the most difficult things I've ever did. It's something that you just can't understand until you go through it. Just the psychological warfare, the pressure, and part of that transition. What was helpful was I had great support here at Sacred Heart, way more than the average Division I coach is going to have, and them sticking with me through a couple lean years because it is such a big transition. I mean, you think as an assistant, you know everything, you have all the answers because the losses hurt you, but they don't kill you. As a head coach, right, those things, boy, they take years off your life. And I've lost a lot of years, unfortunately. So I'm very blessed. Coach Bike he was at the game this weekend. We got 2 losses. I'm so disappointed. Every time it comes to a game and we lose, I feel like I'm letting him down. And but he's so great. He's been so supportive from the first day I took over. He was just like, hey, this is your team. You do your thing. But I'm so grateful for his mentorship, his guidance, and his friendship. And he lives, most of the time now he's full time in West Palm Beach, and I miss him terribly because I love spending time with him, and we talk, not as regularly as I would like, but I miss seeing him one-on-one because he's such a thoughtful, fascinating person, and I feel like I learn something from him every time I talk to him. So I've been so fortunate to have those 3 mentors, and I think one of the reasons I've been able to survive, besides the unbelievable support I've had, is because of their guidance.
Of course, and I think obviously what Coach Mike did with that program and how you've been able to turn it around and continue to find success is unbelievable. Now, I want to get to your team, and I don't want to hold you for too long. Obviously, you got a big game coming up on Friday. But I know for the first few years when you were the Pioneers coach, or kind of around that time, you had first team All NEC talent Quincy McKnight. He later transferred to Seton Hall and played in the Big East, and then played professional basketball in the NBA G League. And thus far, he is the only Sacred Heart alumni to make it to the big leagues. What was so special about Quincy, and what made him so coachable, and what made him such a great talent both on the court and off the court?
Well, obviously, when you get to the level that Quincy got to, you have to have unbelievable gifts, God-given gifts, which he had. He was long, he was athletic, but Quincy was an extremely hard worker. He had extremely high basketball IQ as well. That's why he was able to make that transition from Sacred Heart to Seton Hall to the Big East. At the time that the Big East, the Big East is, a top 3 or 4 or 5 program in the country, is because now obviously he had the physical gifts, but his understanding of how to play the game, how to be a good teammate. He really, Quincy came from outstanding coaches. He played for the legendary Vito Montelli, who passed away a couple of years ago. So he really understood what being part of a great program was all about. So when he was here, his freshman year, we had another great player, Kane Broom, who transferred, another Connecticut native. He was from East Hartford, so you probably aren't as familiar with him. But Kane was on his way to scoring 3,000 points. He was the player of the year. So Quincy was able his first year here to be a kind of a Batman, a Robin to.
I kind of take a back seat to him, yeah,
a little bit, and see how Kane was kind of took over. So Kane transfers,
right.
Quincy comes back from the year as sophomore, and he's ready to take over. And so he was just a dominant player. I mean, he could affect the game in so many ways, offensively, defensively. When he moves on to Seton Hall, I think his playing for Coach Montelli, playing for the PSA Cardinals, one of the elite AAU programs in the country, played with some NBA players on that team. He was kind of a role guy. That experience at St. Joe's with great players with the PSA Cardinals, his freshman year kind of being a complimentary player. When he went to Seton Hall, he had been in that situation. He knew sometimes guys are these alphas that score a ton of points,
right,
make that jump to the higher level, and their role changes a little bit. Well, he was, because of his basketball IQ and his experience in those great programs, in St. Joe's, PSA Cardinals, playing for us, not as the main guy, he goes to Seton Hall and says, hey, I know how to be a piece to the puzzle. I don't have to be the alpha taking all the shots kind of guy. So that made it a easier transition for him than most players that are just ball dominant guys at a lower level. So, but it's a credit. Quincy's a wonderful player. He's, we were so blessed that we had him for 2 years. He still comes by a ton. He's in the area, and heck, if we could have players for 2 years as good as Quincy McKnight and Kane Broom, we would take that.
100%. And then Quincy obviously ended up having a very successful career in the game of basketball. I do want to ask you, when I first met you, it was at the press conference after your big win against Fairfield, and kind of when I was listening to you, it was obvious statistics were forefront in the way that you examined and analyzed the game. With all the advanced analytics these days, there's so much out there. There's so much resources for that. How much do statistics and analytical breakdown kind of go into your system and approach here at Sacred Heart?
That's a good question. I mean, it's definitely a balance. When I was coming up in coaching, it was, the basic box score stats were there. So you looked at, hey, how did we rebound the ball? What did we shoot? But it wasn't a focus. And it wasn't something that, even as an assistant, that I had a ton of exposure with. As I took over, hired some younger assistants who kind of came up with that. Truth be told, I learned a lot of it from our assistant coaches. Tom Barrett, who is heavy analytics, Kyle Steinway, and I learned a ton from them in terms of they would throw these advanced analytics at me, and my question was always, okay, why should this be important to me? Because it's always about the eye test. And then some basic stats like, what was our rebound margin, things like that. But
right.
Once those things were explained, I'm like, okay, this makes a lot of sense to me. And as I learned more from the younger guys, and I said, hey, these things can really help us. And listen, do they help you? Do they make you 100% better? No, but look at the standings right now. If you can get a little edge anywhere, that's a big difference.
I mean, it's all so crammed up in the middle of the MAAC right now. Yeah.
Of course. And so if you can be 5% better here and 2% better here, and maybe that's the difference in 2 or 3 wins. Well, 2 or 3 wins is the difference between first and eighth, in this league, or going to Atlantic City or not going to Atlantic City. So
right. Yeah.
I would say it's a balanced approach. We certainly, the way we play offense is very analytic approach in our shot selection. So that we certainly do. We're all about possessions and valuing possessions. Um, defensively, we've had some shortcomings. We know that the analytics screen that. So certainly it's a factor in not only how we play, but who we play. We do advanced analytics for practice, certainly before games start, when there's a lot more practices, in determining who should we be playing more or not. Because again, the eye test is always, you don't ignore that, and you don't ignore guys that are willing to sacrifice and give up their body and those kind of things. Those factor in, but it's a balance. So we certainly, I would say, are, maybe, I think there's some teams that are more analytical approaching us, but we're certainly in the higher end of that category. We really rely on those quite a bit in our decision-making process. But I would not say we are married to that. Like sometimes you do have to, what is this guy giving? There's a spirit to the game. Like, I just talked to my team and we lose to Siena, and I think I don't know if our edge was there, our spirit was there. I thought they, and sometimes that's a major factor. We lose to Quinnipiac in a game, and they kind of impose their will on us a little bit, and that's, analytics don't see that part of it. So those are things that we discuss too. But we certainly we look at those things in our game planning, in our who we play. It's a major factor. But to say we ignore the other things is not completely true. It's a balance, like anything in life. Like anything, you need to have some balance, and it has to be, what do you value? There's a lot of different ways to win. Some teams are locked down. Hey, we're going to play low possession games. Some teams are, hey, we want a lot of possessions because we like the way we're playing offense better. So you got to find out what you're comfortable with, what you think you're good at. And again, just like I said, being true to your personality. What do you feel like you coach better? Because it doesn't matter what as a coach. If you're great at giving a clinic, that means you're a good clinician. Doesn't mean you're a good coach. What can you convey to your players so that they execute? There's guys that are brilliant basketball minds, but they might not have the wherewithal to teach that to a player and get them to execute. That's a big part of it too. There's coaches that are brilliant coaches that, maybe they struggle in that area. So, and there's other coaches that are not great X's and O's coaches at all. Don't know the analytics, but they're a force of nature, and they can just impose their will on a practice or a game, and they get their players to respond. And so you have to know what you're good at if you want to survive, and really, and then surround yourself with people that the things you're not quite as good at, so they can help you in the areas of weakness. That's what the great coaches do. You look at Howie Dickman, for example. He had 3 Division I coaches, head coaches, on his staff at one time in the Northeast Conference, which is unheard of. He found coaches that he said, hey, he's good at this. I need him. He's good at this, and he, and that's part of putting a good staff together.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned kind of how you have to have a balance. I always use this saying whenever I'm using analytics or statistics, when I'm using it for my work or whatever. I always say, stats don't lie, but they also don't tell the full story. A guy could have 8 rebounds, but if he gets 5 kind of down the stretch when the game doesn't really mean much, the statistic doesn't lie, but it's also not sharing the full story of what exactly you can get out of that statistic.
If a guy had a bad shoot, you're down 12 and he's 0 for 4 from 3, and then he hits 3 threes late, and he ends up, 3 for 7 when the game was meaningless. All right, he made them. You still got to make those, but did it impact? Here's the key with analytics and anything. What is impacting winning the most? And evaluating that. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to win as many games as possible. So that's the balancing act is this statistic impacting winning? And when I was kind of being taught analytics, that was my big question. It's like, why should I care about this? Tell me why I need to care about this. How is this helping us win? And because there's a lot of elements that go into winning, analytics being one of them. So that's kind of our approach to it. I do buy into it, and I feel like it's made me a better coach. But you can't ignore the other things that you learned as well, because again, there's a lot of things that go into winning. that aren't that can't be measured with a number, and you got to try to keep those things, whether it's leadership or force of nature or energy or things of that nature.
Transitioning year, you guys kind of had a lot of changes going into the season, a newly renovated arena, but then most importantly, I mean, for the kind of the first decade of when you had this job, Sacred Heart was a part of the Northeast Conference. You guys make that transition. You're joining the MAAC, and you're kind of fitting in all right. You guys are in contention for a first round bye in the MAAC tournament. How have you guys been able to make this seamless transition? You have a new arena. You have so much turnover in college basketball. We're going to get into that. How are you guys able to make this seamless transition and kind of, you talked about it, imposing your will on the other teams in the conference?
Yeah, I think we did a good job in recruiting. We knew we were making this move last fall. So in putting this recruiting class together and putting this team together, now the beauty and the curse of college basketball now is you're going to have pretty much a new team every year.
Right.
So, usually if you had a bad recruiting year 5 to 10 years ago, it wouldn't hit you until a year or two later. Well, if you have a bad recruiting year now, you're in big trouble because you're probably turning over 6 to 10 new guys every year now. So we knew we were bringing in a lot of new guys. We only have one player on our roster that played any meaningful minutes that's in our rotation. So we had Anquan Hill sitting out, who we thought would be a good MAAC player. And then we just felt like we needed more length and athleticism. I think that might be a little bit of the separator between the Northeast Conference and the MAAC is you got to get a better player, but you got to get a better athlete too, a little taller, a little longer, a little more athletic. And we thought we did that in recruiting, not only with our transfers, but our freshmen. And they've panned out. We've had, as you saw, we have 2 outstanding freshmen that are really contributing in Mekhi Connor and now Niall Ralph Byer.
I mean, I got nothing but great things to say about Mekhi. I mean, I spoke with him in the press conference. He's kind of reflecting the praise. I mean, he just seems so locked in on the goal. He must be such a coachable and such a great player to be with.
He's wonderful, and usually when you rely on freshmen, it's a real risk. He's really, kind of that gamble has paid off because he's obviously a great talent, but he's a student of the game. He's a super coachable kid. He's a wonderful kid, and he's playing great for us. And Niall is similar. He's gotten better every week. He's gotten a little bit better, and to the point where certainly we don't beat Fairfield without those guys, and they were good again against against Quinnipiac and Siena. So those 2 guys have helped a ton. Myrie Stewart, Division II transfer, has been excellent for us. Athletic, great player at that level. We thought he made that transition pretty well because of his experience. He's older. Griffin Baruch from Hofstra, he played at a great program. He certainly has helped us, and we took Bryce Johnson back. He was with us for 3 years at Northeastern. So we had some experience, but some young talent. And then Tanner coming back helped us a ton. Anquan Hill sitting out. And then some other pieces. Falu Gay is going to be a good player for us. So, we think we hit on recruiting pretty good to give us a chance to be competitive. And now the next step is hopefully finish strong, make a run at this thing. Who knows? It's anybody's thing. But I think going forward, I think the biggest key is, can you retain some of your best players? That's going to be a big element, going into next year's. Can we retain some of these guys that have eligibility left? Very difficult to do. If you look at the top 3 teams in the league, they did it better than anyone else. Quinnipiac was able to keep Amari Monroe. They were able to keep Savion Lewis. They were able to keep Otieno. Those are 3 really, really good players. Marist was able to keep Daughtry and Pasquarelli and Collins Roberts. 3 warriors. And then fill them with good players. And then, of course, Merrimack was able to keep Bud Clark, Tumu, and Tumu could be one of the most underrated players in the league. I mean, this guy blocks shots. He's a defensive menace. And then obviously Bud Clark is not underrated. He's probably one of the 1 or 2 best players in the league. So when you're able to do that, and you have to have good coaching, those are great programs. Coach Pecora, Coach Dunn, Coach Gallo, those guys are great coaches. They have great continuity. I think that's the roadmap, going forward after this year. Hopefully we can make our mark this year, really make a run at this thing. And then going forward, how we're going to be next year is, how does recruiting go? Because we have to fill in some pieces. But can we keep some of our best players? You're not going to keep them all. Can we keep some of them? And that's going to be that's the challenge in the MAAC and anywhere. Even if you look at University of Connecticut, like how were they able to repeat a national championship? Well, they're able to keep Donovan Clingan from going to the
Tristan
NBA.
Newton, right? Yeah.
They're able to keep him. And then they fill him in and they hit the home run with Cam Spencer. They keep, Hassan Diarra, who was a major, sixth man of the year, from the first national championship to the second. So, now listen, you need great coaching and you need all those other things. And, Coach Hurley is going to go to the Hall of Fame someday. But that continuity is so key. Samson Johnson got some experience and then was a great backup on the second national championship team.
Right.
So I think that's a big, big key. Simple, but not easy. Because when you have very good players in today's college basketball, they're going to have a lot of options. And what you hope is that you show them how much you value them, how much value Sacred Heart as a basketball program and as a university can bring to them, and hopefully you do the best you can to retain some really good players.
I want to go back to one of the points you kind of said about how it's so tough it's essentially a whole other job. Not only are you trying to recruit new players, you're trying to keep the ones you already have. Kind of this whole NIL, player empowerment, transfer portal, kind of this new era of college basketball and the rules or lack thereof that limit them. It's kind of made it tricky for coaches. There's kind of a mixed bag of opinions from collegiate coaches about what they think or whether these changes are good or bad for the game. For you personally, before we kind of break down kind of what your team's going to do in this final stretch, for you personally, what are your thoughts on this new landscape? And do you feel it's right for the players? Do you feel it's kind of a little unfair? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, listen, I think probably 25 to 30 years ago, coaches probably had too much control. It has totally swung in the other direction. So it's probably swung a little too much the other way. I think it's certainly changed the game.
Right.
It's something that you either adapt or die. That's
Right.
the old saying. Do I love it? No, of course I don't love it. You know what I love? I love coaching a kid for 4 years like Ken LaRose and going to his wedding in March because I have a 4-year relationship with him.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, and actually he married a Sacred Heart tennis player here. He married in Puerto Rico. So I love that. I miss that part of it because here's the positives of the changes. Here are the positive. Players have options. It's good to have options. All right. They have value. It's good to be valued and get compensated for your value. Those are all positive things. It helps if you have a bad year, you can turn it around quick. You know what I mean? Now, listen, if you have a good
year, it kind of goes the other direction, right?
It does put pressure on every recruiting class, significantly more than before. I don't love the fact that relationships are still super important because you can still develop a relationship with someone in 8 months to a year. It's just probably not as deep as 4 years. Because after 4 years, you've really been through a lot together. You've seen the whole process evolve. So I do think players are missing that. I was at the Final Four, and coaches go every year, and I grew up in Connecticut. And so, for example, UConn's in the Final Four, and I happen to be right close to the UConn section where the coaches were. And I see Rip Hamilton and Ray Allen and Donnie and Danielle and Kemba Walker, and the list goes on. They're all there wearing their UConn stuff with great pride. And what makes me sad is, Ray Allen played college basketball for 3 years at one place. Like, those days are over. And so I do think, if you're a young guy, and you'll one thing you'll hear from most successful people in all walks of life, whatever profession or whatever, one of the things they talk about is relationships are the key to success, to happiness, to fulfillment, right? And I looked at that UConn, I said, boy, those relationships that those guys have with Coach Calhoun, with the University of Connecticut, I don't know if these new young players are going to have that. Now, listen, UConn won a national championship, so Cam Spencer will forever be linked. But just say they lost in the second round. Will he be forever linked? Because that was his third school. So I think
Right.
sometimes we're taking that fulfillment and that joy away from some of these players. I think that's a net negative. And I don't know how you correct that because, like 20 years from now, where is your home? Well, if you went to 4 or 5 schools, which one are you picking as your home? The one you had the most success at? Or if you were at one place for, one place only, or 2 places and you graduated from one and where you have a home. And the guys that stay at one place 20 years from now, I mean, I have these guys from the 80s, Sacred Heart guys from the 80s come by and they love this place. They won a national championship. They have so much pride in when we win, they feel excitement
They feel the
because they're so,
satisfaction, right?
yeah, because they're so connected. And I think we're gonna lose that a little bit. And college is the one unique time where you can have a lifelong connection. Because once you become a pro in whatever you do, whether it's athletics, the days of staying at one job for 30 years, it's almost non-existent in the professional world. Well, college is the one last bastion where it's your family. And we've lost that. So that does.
I mean, John Fanta. I know you just recently spoke with him on an interview. I've had him on the right side of my screen before. A great guy, and he was just kind of talking about the same thing. Like, there's no attachment. There's no college home for these players. There's no reunion part. Like, you kind of ruin that part of
No
college.
question.
I mean, he said the solution to everything. He thinks there should be a contract system in place, which I think is
Oh,
interesting.
That's coming, and that's definitely coming. Now, it has to come because the way it's going is unsustainable. But I do agree also that you lose that. There's a beauty to that relationship, and so I am for the current players now. A part of me is sad for these guys because they're never gonna have to experience that. I'm a Brandeis graduate. I still am super tight with my friends and my coach and it's because I was there for 4 years. It was wonderful. And not that again, transferring is all bad because some players they're not in the right place and they need um, a new beginning, a new environment, a new scene, or whatever.
Right, but now it just feels like every year it's more like they're using it as just like one step and like kind of like
Yeah.
like a
Well, the other
what's it
thing
called?
too
The
is
thing
like,
about like a bouncing thing, like to just bounce to the next level, and there's no like really attachment or personal reason
no
why.
question. And a lot of times it changes the mindset of like, there's almost something wrong with you if you don't leave. Like, why? Why are you staying there? Like people are
Right,
questioning now when they stay. And so which is mind-boggling. So it does make me sad. I do think it doesn't make the product better. It, like I said, probably 20, 30 years ago, coaches and institutions probably had way too much control. It's probably swung a little bit the other way. Maybe with contracts and you can sign 2 or 3 year contracts and really develop that mutual beneficial relationship. Um, it has some things that make me sad. I don't know if that's a corny word or not, but there's some sadness to it. Um,
100%.
but
Yeah,
it's not changing. And so what we try to do is treat players with respect and dignity and help them in any way we can in their social, academic, athletic lives so that when there is a decision to be made, and a lot of these are financial, and I understand that, but if we can be competitive or in the ballpark financially, they'll appreciate and value what we've tried to do to help them,
right.
and so it's a tricky thing. A lot of old time coaches, and I guess I guess I'm starting to be in the old timer category at some point here. Um, I do think there is a little part of you that is saddened by the new landscape, but it's not changing. And so, what you try to do is develop the best relationship you can in that short period of time that we're together. Because the reality is, it's still about relationships. It's still about relationships. They're just now much smaller time frames,
Right.
and you do the best you can. And for them to understand, like, hey, listen, most relationships are mutually beneficial. It's not one sided, and we're doing everything we can to help you. So you do everything that you can to help us and our program and our university. And Coach Cal used to always say, like, everybody wants to eat, right? And so when you're doing it correctly, everybody's succeeding. And we try to really stress it to our guys, like, hey, the best way for you to get what you want whether it's the next step or more money or whatever the pro contract is. Hey, let's win, because people want to win. And when you win, more people get the credit. So
Of course.
we try to stress that. Doesn't always work. It's going to be a huge off season for us in about 5 weeks. But we're going to try to just max out these next 4 or 5 weeks the best we can to try to finish strong and surprise a lot of people down the stretch here in the MAAC.
I want to talk about how you guys can surprise people. You guys had won 5 games in a row, which included that great win against Fairfield, and things kind of seem to be gelling. And then, kind of as every season, you have your ups and downs. It's like a stock market in a sense. You guys have fallen short 2 tight battles in the MAAC, but you guys have fallen short in your past 2 games. Now, the path is not easier from here. 2 road games all the way, one of which against Bud Clark, Coach Gallo, and Merrimack, the other against last year's automatic bid to the NCAA tournament from the MAAC in St. Peter's. And then, if you really look far ahead to end the month, you're at home against Marist. Those are 3 very, very good basketball teams. What are you telling your group here? As you guys have had some success, if you want to make sure that all doesn't kind of flame out in these final weeks, what are you telling your group on how you guys can respond to end the month of February and go into that critical month of March?
Well, just let's really focus. We got 4 weeks. Let's not worry about any distractions. Let's not worry what's going to happen after those 4 weeks. This is what we've worked for. Let's get the most out of every day. Let's get better. Let's evaluate our weaknesses. Certainly, defense and rebounding was a problem this week. We scored 90 points against Winnipeg and lost. Usually when you score 90 in a college basketball game, you're supposed to win that game. So clearly, we didn't do enough defensively and rebounding-wise. Same thing against Siena. We did some good things offensively. So continue to be an efficient offensive team, but we've got to get grittier and tougher defensively. And then the way you do that is you attack every day and really try to get better at those things or improve on your strengths. All right. And then address your weaknesses and make them a little less of a weakness. So that's what it takes. You got to clear your mind. Everybody's mentally and physically fatigued at this point. So the teams that can kind of drown out the distractions and really focus on being the best you can be are the teams that are going to have the most success, because everybody's tired right now. Everybody's anxious. If you're having a great year, you don't want to blow it. If you're having a bad year, you want to dig out of it. Everybody's going through something. The teams and the players and coaches that can kind of drown out those distractions and be tunnel vision on getting better every day, and then bouncing back from like you said, the ups and downs of wins and losses. They can bounce back and not let a win or a loss negatively impact you too much. Sometimes you can win and think you have everything figured out, and then get your brains beat in the next game. The good teams, you look at Yale. Yale, wins a thriller against Penn by 1, and then the next game it could be a letdown there. They blow out Princeton. That's why they're such a good program. James Jones is so consistent. The best teams aren't way better than the teams that aren't as good.
Sure,
they're just way more consistent. You know what I mean? They're not having these wild swings that maybe the weaker teams are having. So how do you do that? You be consistent in your approach and hope for the best. You got to play good. You got to perform. But if you're more consistent on a daily basis, the odds of you performing well increase exponentially.
On any given night, what is the core component to your team that should make opponents fearsome going into any game against your Pioneers?
We put 5 players on the court that can all score. So you have to make some decisions defensively. How are you going to guard us? Now, Siena the other day says, hey, we're going to give them threes. Now we shoot 37, 38, 39% from 3 as a team. Shot 17%, 2 for 24 yesterday. That worked. Generally, that doesn't work. It did yesterday. So I think that's what makes us most dangerous, is that we generally put 5 players in the court that all can put the ball in the basket. There's no one you can play off of. There's no one that you can, kind of double off of. I think we're also a selfish team. Guys are willing to give up good shots for great shots. So that has been our strength in our wins. And the thing that we have to get better at is we got to get a lot grittier and a lot tougher. And we got to come up with some stops. And even yesterday, it didn't go as well as we wanted to. We still cut it to 2 with 2 minutes to go. We cut it to 1 with 1:30 and couldn't come up with a big stop. So we need to tighten up in that area. But I think what makes us dangerous is that we can get 80 or 90 on a given night. And, that's a tall task for someone else to get more than 80. or more than 90, which Quinnipiac, to their credit, did.
Right.
So usually if we're going to get in the 80s or 90s, we're going to have a good chance of winning the game. So that's our strength, and we got to make sure that we do that on a consistent basis.
Coach, we don't want to keep you too long because we know you got a big game coming up later this week, but I do got to ask you kind of before we wrap this up. You're around the Sacred Heart group every single day. These are the players you recruited. Again, you mentioned maybe it's not those 4-year relationships you have, but it's still that 8-month, 1-year relationship that you're building with these guys. And you could speak as well as anyone to these guys' character, their heart, their determination on any given day. What about this team that you have in place here at Sacred Heart? What about them makes them so special and possibly primed for a MAAC tournament run and an automatic bid to the NCAA tournament over these next few weeks?
Well, I think we have good character guys. They're good people. What's important, they're about the right things on and off the court. We don't, knock on wood, I very rarely have had to worry about anything other than coaching them. So the character of our team is great. We have good guys that if I was in college, I would be friends with, I would hang out with, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they represent the university in a first-class manner. They're very well liked on campus because they're about the right things. So I think that's what makes them special, because not every team is made that way. And I think they want to. I think they're willing to make some sacrifices that need to be made. So we have good people. We have high character people. They're willing to be coached. Now we just got to go and perform. So I feel very fortunate. We have a great group of guys that I like being around. That I like being around each other. And when you have that, good things have a chance to happen.
Coach Latina, this has been awesome. We really appreciate you taking the time to do this. You've given so much great advice and the advice you've heard from others and how you're kind of carrying that into your legacy and the things do you balance and the things do you appreciate as a coach on and off the court. Before we wrap this up, I do want to ask you real quick, if you had to give one piece of advice to an aspiring basketball coach listening to this right now, what would it be and why?
That's a great question. I would say,
I get people thinking with that one for sure.
Well, here's what I would say. I would say, when you are fortunate enough to get a job at the college level, focus on that job and that job alone. Do the best job you can for that head coach and for that program. Don't worry about your next step. The best way to get the next job is to crush the job you're at. And if you don't love your role on the staff, crush what your role is and then ask for more responsibility. All right. Because no job, in a successful program, everything matters. So if your job is to order the food, be the best at it. Never make a mistake on that. And then crush that job so that your head coach or whoever you answer to as assistant says, well, he's doing that job so well, I'm going to give him more or ask for more. And then focus on the present. All right. When you worry about your next job, all right, you don't do as good a job as you can. So take your job, be all in on that job, all in for that head coach. All right. Because that's who's going to help you get your next job is the people you work with and for. And so that's what I would say. Don't get caught up in, hey, well, man, I'm a GA. Be the best GA. Be such a good GA that whoever you answer to, because sometimes at a GA at the highest level, the head coach barely knows you. You know what I mean?
Right.
So whoever the system is, that when there's another job opening, they can call their friend and say, hey, you have to hire this guy. He is tremendous. He is great because of X, Y, and Z. Sometimes in life, not just coaching, we're so worried about the next step that we're not maxing out.
Thinking about the step you're at right now, right?
The other thing is you're not enjoying that step. Everyone wants to be a head coach, and it's tremendous. Believe me, I would never give it away. But there's some beauty in being an assistant. There's of being a piece and figuring that out, and then that whole element of it. So really, my advice would be, do the best job you can. Don't worry about the next job. After the season, I would sit down with whoever I answer to, whether it's the assistant or head coach, and say, hey, how do you think I did? What do you think I need to get better at? What's my next step? And they say, hey, we think you need another year or two here. So don't be in a rush to don't skip steps, because that usually doesn't work. That usually just sets you up for failure. Really, really. And here's the other thing is, don't worry about money if you can for a while, because the reality of coaching is money doesn't come for a long time. If money is an issue, it's probably going to be tough sledding. You got to figure it. Now, listen, you got to pay for your bills. You got to figure it out. But once you have that, don't worry about saving, because the reality is that's not going to be a realistic element. It's a difficult, hill to climb, and just do the best you can to survive. Survive as much as you can until you get, the break where you are making some decent money. But I'd say the number one thing I'd say is focus on doing the best job you can where you are, no matter what it is, because most coaches know this and who've been around. If you are really maxing out and it's the most menial jobs and you're crushing that, how you do some things is how you usually do everything. And coaches know that. So if you take a lot of pride in that, and I remember saying this to Coach D when I was there, because I was a third assistant starter and I worked my way up all to his top assistant. And I took great pride in, like, when I took over the camp, I said, I want this camp to be the best it's ever been. I wanted to have the most campers. I wanted to be the best run. When I was in charge of recruiting, I want recruiting to take the next step. So whatever your responsibility is, make it better than it was before you took over. Make it the best it's been ever. Whatever that job is. And now the coach says, hey, I gave him this. I know he's never recruited before, but I gave him 4 responsibilities, and it's way better now than it was before. And recruiting will be better too, because that's just his track record. That's got to be your mindset. Don't worry about skipping steps. It's, I know you can get frustrated. Sometimes, you're going to get stuck at a place, and embrace that. Like, hey, especially if you're at a good place for a good person, holy cow, take advantage of that.
Hard to find. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not an easy road, but I wouldn't trade my road for anything. And that would be my best advice to a young assistant coach.
Anthony Latina, thank you so much for joining me for that piece of advice. I'm sure no matter what industry you're in, I mean, I think that's so important, and all the great things you said. I mean, 57 minutes. We really do appreciate you taking the time. And we know you got, a tough road, but a fun road ahead as well. And we'll all be cheering for you on Friday night when you guys go at MAAC, and then for the remainder of the season. Coach Latina, we really appreciate you taking the time today. We really do.
Chase, thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you. Back to your side as well. We really appreciate you coming on, and a lot of great things to look forward to for your program. So again, thanks again. Alongside Anthony Latina, the head coach of the Sacred Heart men's basketball team, looking to make a run to the NCAA tournament. I'm your host, Chase Coburn, saying so long from the Cool Sports Network. Take care.